Good morning. I'm Stacy Krim, and I'd like to welcome you back to the UNCG Green Library Group video series. As part of our Wildcrafting series, today I'm going to talk to you about the basics of plant identification and poisonous plants. The first thing you need to do when you begin working with wildcrafting is you check out field guides, and that's one place the library comes in very handy. The first field guide you should check out for this area would be the Peterson's Field Guide to Eastern Forests. I like this because it covers the plant life, the flora, the habitats, so the waterways you would find within the forest. This isn't the book you would necessarily use specifically for plant identification. It's what you use to get yourself acclimated to that environment and what you can anticipate finding. And this book is available at UNCG libraries, and I will be turning it in about 5 minutes. The next book, specifically if you're going to identify medicinal plants and herbs, is the Peterson's Field Guide to Medicinal Plants and Herbs. And this is a wonderful book. It is the standard book for identifying plants in nature. It has colored pictures, which is very important. It talks about the family, the taxonomy of the plant, when it's in bloom, and the dangers associated with that plant. And it's a must-have if you're going to be wildcrafting. But when you wildcraft and you use books as field guides for identifying those plants, you should never depend on one book. You should always be looking at multiple pictures of those plants because there's so much variation within a single plant species that within its spectrum of growth from spring to fall, let's say, there's so many variations. What may be in this book may not be what you find in nature. So you always want to look at least 3 credible sources, field guides for identifying plants. So if you're not a botanist and you want to begin identifying plants and understanding them, the best book in my opinion is Botany in a Day. And this is a book about botany for people who don't really want to know much about botany. They just want to get down to the practical aspects of it. It has excellent diagrams on plants. There's no colored pictures or photographs, but it tells you how to examine a plant to notice the variation, so it makes plant identification a bit easier without going into all of the scientific lingo. So for plant identification, usually when you're beginning wildcrafting and you're an amateur, you want to make certain that you're wildcrafting when the plant is in full bloom. It's easiest when the plant is a flowering plant because flowers tend to look very distinguishable from plant to plant. So you want to look at the shape of the leaves, the time it's blooming, the size of the plant. Are the leaves oval? Are the leaves pointed at the end? Are they thorned? Do they have little hairs on them? What do the little ribs on the leaves look like? And that's really the first step and the easiest way to begin looking at plants and examining them to figure out what they are. The flowers are very important, and this means when you're learning wildcrafting, it's something that you're going to be learning through multiple seasons. Because when that plant first starts blooming in spring, it doesn't necessarily have all of the characteristics you need as an amateur to identify it. So you look at a plant, you go out in spring, you look and see what's blooming, and then you go back continuously to try to identify it. And you get to see it through all of its stages, and that's the safest way to identify that plant if you're going to actually try to eat it. Now, in nature, there are always some plants that look alike, and it's a misconception that every plant has a plant that looks just like it that is poisonous. That's probably the biggest fear I run into with people learning to wildcraft. There are some plants that look very much alike where one is edible and one is poisonous, but not really that many. And once you pay attention to the differences between those two plants, you can usually easily tell the difference. What I do recommend if you're beginning plant identification and wildcrafting is that you do not harvest the plant until you see it in full bloom, because that's going to be the easiest time to identify it. If you're going to harvest a plant for its root, go and stick a little sign there to distinguish that that is where the plant is located, because a lot of mistakes are made by wildcrafters when the plant has died away on the top and they go to dig up the root, but it's actually a root next to it that is from a dangerous plant. So the first thing as a wildcrafter you need to learn are not the helpful plants, the edible plants. You need to learn the poisonous plants. And in the eastern US and the Piedmont, our typical poisonous plants are going to be poison ivy, maybe poison oak. And what constitutes a poisonous plant it's variable. For some herbs, the characteristics that people would call a poisonous plant are actually the characteristics in it we want to use for specific illness. So really you're just learning about any plant that may be a potential danger when you harvest it or ingest it. The NC State has a really good website on local poisonous plants in this region, but this is one really good book I got out of the University Library's book sale. That's Poisonous Plants, a Field Guide. We do have it in our collection, and it has really great pictures of a variety of plants you would probably know that are poisonous, like poison oak and poison ivy, but also things you may not realize are poisonous, like a potato when it turns green, or St. John's wort. Because by field guide standards, there are certain health conditions from which you need to be very aware that those plants can cause harm if they're used incorrectly. So when I begin wildcrafting, the first thing I want to do in a new environment is identify every single poisonous plant in that area. So once you've figured out what plants are the poisonous plants in your area, and hopefully later in the series we'll find some examples, they're not in bloom just yet, we move on to what are some of the edible plants in those areas. In our next video, we're going to discuss what edible plants are basically in the library's front lawn, how you would go about identifying them safely, and how you would go about harvesting them and when you would harvest them. Keep your questions coming in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.